Well, thank you all for coming out here tonight to hear Holly Buckingham. Um, how is everyone doing? You realize it's going to snow more this weekend. Finally, are there any people? Yes, that's exactly how I feel. But I don't know that that's a universal pleasure. I see heads shaking, like, please God, save me from any more of the snow. We haven't had any winter, and just I'm saying this to you, we haven't had any winter this year, but it's still early, and it could change, and we could get something like a normal winter yet, which could mean snow to May. Yeah, I mean, I am not making that up. That's average. So, um, I, on the other hand, am tickled at the very thought. It just fills me with joy that it's going to snow 3 feet this weekend in the mountains. And James Stolen back here and I were just talking about it, and he too feels a similar joy. All right, I'll stop being an asshole, and I will just read my introduction. It's a pleasure to welcome Polly Buckingham to EOU, which we've been trying to arrange for a year. Last year we had a winter visitor in January who grew up in Baker County in the 1950s, but had lived most of her life in New York City and was very brave about coming out here in early January. And the night, we were just talking about this as we were walking in tonight, the night of her reading, we had 80-mile-an-hour winds with snow. And so it was basically a hurricane of snow. I was just laughing so hard I could hardly stand it. Jody Varon, my colleague, took our visitor by the arm and linked arms with her and led her from the parking lot to this very room where she gave her reading to it was a great success. But then the highway was closed for the next 3 days. And she in both directions, and so she spent more time in La Grande and Eastern Oregon than she had spent in the previous 45 years. That's not going to happen tonight. Um, uh, I met Polly through her editorship of Stringtown Press and through our colleague Christopher Howell. That is, in addition to Polly being a fiction writer and a poet, she is an editor of Stringtown and Willow Spring Presses, as well as a teacher of creative writing at Eastern Washington University. Her chapbook of stories, A Year of Silence, won the Jean Leiby Memorial Award for fiction, and her full-length collection, The Expense of a View, won the Catherine Ann Porter Prize in short fiction. She is also a 3-time finalist for the Flannery O'Connor Award in fiction, and she is a recipient of the Oregon State Artists Trust Fellowship. Her work in several genres appears in many fine literary magazines, among them the Gettysburg Review, the Moth, the Threepenny Review, Witness, the New Orleans Review, and many others. As a poet and fiction writer, she says, I am more interested in what is unknown than what is known. I value mystery above empiricism. This notion is a political one in that it rejects the dominant culture's need for data and facts and instead values magical thinking and the messiness of what it means to be human. My characters are typically deeply introspective, often rural and often under great psychological duress or up against enormous changes in their lives. Her stories, another critic writes, are united by characters, usually talented young women coping with loss or a difficult relationship, achieving a small measure of peace and grace amid difficult circumstances. Well, tonight it's so easy to get here and to get away, and tomorrow too. And so it is a special pleasure to welcome Polly Buckingham to EOU. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Not that the mic matters that much because you guys are just right there. So I don't know. This is probably an ambitious lineup for my reading tonight, but I'm going to read poetry and fiction, and I'm going to be reading short story, novel, and poetry in that order. That's kind of crazy, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to start, and they're all in order, in the order in which they were written. So I'm going to start with something from the collection, and then I'm going to read a chapter from a novel, and then I'm going to read some poems. And each piece is fairly small, so they're, good for contemporary attention spans. So this piece is called Honey. The neighbor is in jail. The words snitch, rat, and dead man, and 2 frowny faces are spray painted the color of charcoal across his trailer. What idiot thinks a frowny face is threatening? Her laughter, edgily uncontrollable, feels inappropriate. Beside the trailer is a half-dismembered motorcycle chained to cinder blocks, and below it a large oil stain. Everything has the appearance of having been disrupted and abandoned without warning. It's April, and the branches of the Siberian elm are lined with golden buds, each a tiny replica of the sun. And the sun is finally warm enough to warm her face. Everything is in transition. The meth head is gone. New neighbors moved into the house behind the trailer. And she herself is a transplant with a new job and no new friends. It hurts to swallow, as if glass is stuck in her throat. It's no surprise she would be getting sick, a danger at the core of any great transit. Last night's bottle of wine hasn't helped. But at least the sun warms even her hands and hair. She's picked up the wayward garbage blown in from other people's yards and collected branches and sticks. After a few more slugs of coffee, she'll head to the woodshed for the axe, hoping the exertion of chopping might push away the hangover and illness. It takes 2 visits to the woodshed before she sees the dog. She knows it's dead immediately, though there's no bad smell. It looks like it's sleeping, an old Labrador, rust-colored and sweet. Are those shadows on its face or pockmarks where the cheek has been eaten away? Sunlight presses against her back, but the dog is in a darkness and coolness that betrays the day, and the shadows feel tricky and deceiving. She backs up in case she is wrong, in case it is alive, and in case it rises snarling. The dog is like the wasps' nests that line the angles of the ceiling. They shouldn't be active yet, but you can't help but worry. You can never underestimate an injured animal. She closes the door, squints into the bright sun. All the branches seem to wag. An afternoon wind spins in her ears. She's pretty sure she saw this dog last week, poised in the empty field between the new neighbor's house and hers, gazing in her direction. She's worried about her old cat. She'd worried about her old cat, but then she noticed its paunchy face, the white around its muzzle, its long stare, and the way it stood like old dogs stand, as if it were work. Inside the chill, dark house, assaulted by the smell of dirty dishes and cat pee, She searches through small collections of papers for the landlord's card, frustrated by her mess and her inability to locate anything with any shred of efficiency. The landlord, taciturn, says, "Don't have his number." But then, minutes later, the new neighbor calls. He'll be at work until 9. He'll send his son to pick up the dog. He's sorry, he says. The dog's been missing a week. I thought my ex-wife took her. She hasn't been answering our calls. She does not want to hear about ex-wives or the fact that the dog may have been in her shed as long as a week, having crawled in through an old animal door. She's sitting on the porch, hopeful she can simply point to the shed and the son will collect the dog. But the son seems too young to drive, let alone drive a pickup that size. He doesn't know what to say when she rises to greet him. She realizes, looking at his thin face on the verge of adulthood, that this is his first death. It is not her first death. Death is the one thing in which she is most well versed. She's been around most of my life. He pauses as if it hurts. She's a good dog. How old is she? 13, he says. She's my sister's dog, really. As if this will remove him from his grief. They peer into the darkness of the shed. What's her name? Honey, he says, for her color. But she is not honey-colored. Perhaps copper or rust-colored, but not honey. I have some tarps I was going to take to the dump, she says. They fold the tarps into a makeshift gurney. She crouches beside the dog's head, scared of what she might find underneath. Maggots, mice. But she cannot ask this boy to lift the head. Honey has not been dead long, which feels like a miracle. There are no maggots, no pockmarks, nothing eaten away, only a small pool of blood where the dog's nose rests. She remembers the fist-sized blood stain that must have marked the moment of her first dog's death, how the next dog licked the stain away. When she lifts Honey's head, she reaffirms the dog's loveliness. She gives her shoulder 3 pats. Dust rises into the light that now streams through the cracks in the shed and turns Honey's fur her namesake color. Even the sap beaded around the rings of stacked wood glows a deep amber color in the fugitive light. That night, she sits on the porch step with a quart jar of honey produced by a nearby beekeeper. She eats spoonful after spoonful, though the sugar will feed the sore throat. She thinks of the man she loved before she moved here, though they never spoke of it. For 3 years he inhabited her dreams. They were so connected in these dreams that the waking world, where their union was impossible, felt secondary. Honey, he said, the night she rested her cheek against his chest, that last night, and did not move away. And then they fell back into their shared silence. A boy on a black motorcycle with a black mohawk on his helmet whizzes by, then disappears into the twilight. Something is coming, but she does not know what. Okay, so that's number 1. Okay, so this is a novel draft, and it's not a draft, it's out and about. But I have to tell you a little bit about it. They're 2 very short chapters, and it takes place in Death Valley in a ghost town. And it's about a woman hermit who's living up in this ghost town. At this point in the story, she's been there close to 10 years. And there are no, she's the only living character in this. The rest are, well, they're dead. The ghost town is called Panamint City. It's about 6 miles up, and it's a hike. Now it's a hike. It used to be a road. And about 5,000 foot elevation gain. It was a silver mining town in the late 1870s, and it was a boom town. It didn't produce as much as they speculated it would produce, which is really common. And so, the stock market was really inaccurate, manipulative around this. And it was at the time one of the most violent towns in the country. About 2,000 people lived there at its height. It was one of the first mining towns of that size in Death Valley. So you need to know that about it. You need to know that she's the only living person in this. Milo is 8 years old. His father ran the newspaper during the height of Panamint City during the silver mining times. The Wonder Mine ran the town. Basically, they were the mining company. Joe, is really a minor character in the novel. He's a major character in these chapters, but minor on the whole. And Magic is a mule. Go figure. There's a smelter town in the middle of smelter tower in the middle of town. It's the only one of its kind. And what they would do is, because people were stealing the silver as they ran it down the canyon, they would melt it down into these giant ingots and then take it down on a 20-mule team so that it couldn't be stolen because it was too big to be stolen. And so that's what the smelter tower did. So that shows up in the chapter as well. I think that's all you need to know. Okay, so these chapters are really small. The first one is called Ghost Fair. Joe didn't return that night. The main character's name is Marina. Probably should know that. Joe didn't return that night. Many nights passed before he did return, enough that Marina suspected he wasn't coming back, which was okay. She did not know what she thought of him, this carnival painter. One day she was gathering water near dark, and she thought she saw the faintest lights spinning in a large circle, like a Ferris wheel. She smelled meat grilling and sugar and corn on the cob, but only in certain hot gusts of wind. A few days later, an elephant was standing by the smelter tower, and then it was gone. "Did I see an elephant?" she asked Milo later that afternoon. He was sitting on her buckskin mat while she was piling all of her now unused belongings in a corner: batteries and old stoves, lights without lighter fluid, torn up sleeping bags, pots and pans and plates and bowls, and covering the whole mess in old blankets. "Yep," Milo said. "They brought the elephant today. You know, when my papa come to take me from my aunt's house and said we was going to the desert, and my aunt says, 'I don't think that's right for a child.' My papa said, 'We're going to see the elephant.' Well, I never seen no elephant till the carnival come. My papa said, 'Not a real elephant. We're going to see what all this fuss is about, all that silver fuss.'" Milo spoke quickly, stumbling over his words, humming with an energy even beyond his usual general exuberance. "You should bury all that garbage if you're not going to use it," he said. "And anyway, there's always more stuff." "I suppose," she said, "but it's so trashy up here already. Nothing wants to grow on top of a bunch of garbage." "You'd be surprised," Milo said. "Everything's tough up here." The door was propped open, and outside the sky was turning from deep red to dark blue. Even in the summer, a coolness crept in with the night. Marina started a small fire in the wood stove and lit some candles she'd made from deer fat, wicks made of mesquite root cordage. "Where'd you learn that?" Milo asked. "What?" "Them candles?" She shrugged. "Here and there, I guess." The owl stain stared up at her. "Everybody's going to be there," Milo said. "What?" "At the carnival." All day he'd hummed with this electricity. "It doesn't come much." "Everybody?" Just as she said it, she looked up from the owl stain to find Joe standing in the doorway in a blue bowler hat, striped pants, red suspenders, and a red bow tie. He had a handful of black and purple irises. "You look sharp," Milo said. Her own clothes were shabby: a blue V-neck t-shirt and tan cotton pants with a ripped pocket. She tried to push her hair back behind her ears before she realized she'd cut it short. Instead, she pressed the jagged ends flat against her skull. He looked different from that first day, buzzing with that same energy Milo had had all day, his skin smooth and tanned and glowing instead of ruddy and sweaty as it had seemed that first morning. "Vase?" he asked. Marina handed him a water bottle, but when the flowers left his hand, they turned misty and pale. Still, they lingered on the shelf in their water bottle beside the blue rocks and the pieces of black glass and the pale blue crystal with the phantom inside. "The sky's all lit up out there," Joe said. "You ready?" Marina put on a gray sweater. "I guess so," she said. If you could call this a date, it was her first one since she and Douglas had ridden their bikes to the river and she'd kicked him in the face. Even the Starman had never taken her on dates. They'd hung out together, hiked some, that was the best she could call it. No one had brought her flowers or dressed in bow ties. Whatever little remained in her to be charmed was charmed. I'm sorry I don't have anything nicer." It was a ridiculous thing to say, and she realized that. "That wouldn't be you now, would it?" he said. "Magic's and me's coming too," Milo said. "He's waiting outside for all of Joe's stuff, with all of Joe's stuff." "Stuff?" "Canvases and paints," Joe said. The four set off through the darkening woods, strong with the smell of pine. She'd never seen Magic with packs. When she realized he was proud to be carrying them, she thought how well she knew him, that she could recognize pride in his long brown and black face and his extended stride. By the time they reached the outskirts of Panamint City, the stars had come out. They wound their way through the abandoned structures of Old Town. She had a sense of the basements below her, each with their storage of tales and artifacts. The rocks she walked on felt worn from use, though this was not actually the case. Instead, the invisible paths made themselves visible to her in the starlight. Familiarity and belief breed such visions. The stars gave way to lantern lights bobbing up and down Main Street. People were everywhere, at first shadowy and faceless, parents with children holding their hands and pulling them eagerly, even as they stopped to talk with neighbors. Miners with their arms around women. Their faces were yellow in the light of their lanterns. Along the road were signs for the ladies' nail-driving competition and the fat man's race. "Come see the pachyderms riding bicycles," a man hollered through a red funnel amplifier. In the distance, up by the smelter tower, a giant wheel moved slowly through the sky, lit up by lanterns hanging from each of the seats. "How'd the fair get here anyway?" Marina asked. If she hadn't felt the solidness of the road beneath her, she would have guessed she was dreaming. But she was not dreaming. The Wonder Mine," Milo said. "They can do anything. They're like kings." If there ever was a statement grounded in reality, that was it. The Wonder Mine burned the pinyon pines and preyed on the desperation of the once hopeful miners and of the Timbisha who could no longer survive on the land, and of the Chinese and the Basque and the occasional Mexican. The Wonder Mine brought the spectacle. They fed their workers spectacle when their workers needed food and independence. Was the Ferris wheel before her an illusion? Perhaps, but it was no more an illusion than the stock market feeding off the marketeers of death. The four came upon a crowd of people gathered around something. "The elephant!" Milo shouted and ran ahead. She did not have to push her way through the group. As she got close to the phantoms, they simply disappeared as if parting to make way for her. A heat came off the crowd, the same electricity she'd felt in Milo and Joe. It moved into her own energy field so that she felt a certain aliveness, a giddy excitement, as if she were a child, though as a child such a feeling may well have frightened her. Now it felt like a long-deserved gift. Tonight, among the dead with their faded lanterns, with the enormous sky above her, Joe holding her elbow lightly as she moved through the crowd, a tiny white carnation in his pocket, The excitement felt like food, felt like a tingling light that moved through her. The elephant threw up its enormous head and hollered. A clown sat atop it on a red blanket that hung over the elephant's ribs, advertising the Wonder Mine. Upon closer inspection, the clown was frowning down at the elephant and holding tightly to a thin rope draped over its neck, though it was hard to tell with the enormous upturned red mouth painted on his face. On the other side of the elephant stood a man with a fat rifle, which Marina guessed to be a tranquilizer gun, partially concealed by a long black carnival jacket. Then she noticed the shackle and chain around the elephant's back leg and the anvil the chain was attached to. Had this animal been standing in the same spot all evening? The elephant seemed to look at her as if she were the only person. He gave her a long, sad gaze, and then there was the slightest hint of hysteria in the way his eye rolled away from her. Joe put his arm around her shoulder as if he, too, had seen what she had seen. She felt the arm as if it were a real arm, with weight. She leaned into him and then turned away from the crowd. "Everyone's trapped," he said. "You don't seem to be," she said. "Well, if you mean I don't work for nobody but myself, that's true. But my wandering's its own kind of trap." "You don't stay in one place, then?" "Nah. My father was Mexican and my mother white. You can't stick around anywhere like that. You get driven out or worse if you don't get up and leave. I guess it's in my blood." He paused. "It's not exactly what you'd call freedom." He stopped walking and turned towards her. "You, on the other hand," he said. But he couldn't finish his sentence. "They got corn up there and games and heavy balls you can toss. They got a monkey, too," Milo said, appearing before them, "and a little dog in a tutu. Everyone's going to be there." Something loud rolled across the sky. At first, she thought it was an airplane, and then she thought it was a gunshot. She thought it was the gunshot snap of the metal roof of the mine on the mountainside. But its long rumble at last revealed it as thunder. Still, the sky was lit with stars and the street with lanterns. Even the smelter tower was lit, though she wondered how. It didn't look like like lantern light, more like blue spotlights that rose up from the bottom of it. She thought she recognized two prostitutes from Martha Camp's and some of the shadowy children she'd often seen climbing the crumbling walls of Old Town. A woman with a sawed-off shotgun and a silver flashlight was walking toward them. Her hair was a mass of snarls, and she was wearing overalls and rubber boots. "Milo," Marina said, surprised by the flashlight. "Who's that?" "Who?" Milo asked. "The woman with the shotgun and the crazy hair." "I told you," Milo said. "Everyone's here. That's Shotgun Mary. She's like you." "What?" "Like you. Lived up here when no one else did in one of these ruined places." He gazed at Mary. "Except she's crazy." "Meaning you're not," Joe added. A woman in a halter top was tapping a Camel Light out of a pack beside a guy with a Harley bandana and a leather vest. There was a cluster of barefoot hippies. She thought she recognized the woman she'd found in the car up at Water Canyon. She was throwing back her long hair and laughing as a guy with a ripped muscle shirt pulled her in for a kiss. The four stopped near the Ferris wheel to watch it spin, the faces getting closer, then farther away, then closer again. Children holding the edges of the wooden seats, lovers in one another's arms, people from all ages. No one with gunshots in their foreheads or missing limbs. Everyone was in a state of aliveness, though they were not alive. Magic snorted, his eyes rolling away and back. Milo was chewing an ear of corn, his face glistening with grease. "Look there," he said, spewing chewed bits of corn. "Joe's paintings." A series of wooden sandwich boards announced Mademoiselle Hilda, the Elastic Venus, Herbert, the Human Frog, and The Big, strongest man on earth. The strong man held up a giant wooden cage in which a man on a bicycle pedals around the edges. Hilda's arms wrapped all the way around herself in the form of a human straitjacket. The frogman seemed to look at Marina as if to say, "Have you found your kind yet?" The paintings were surprisingly intricate, and despite the freakishness of the characters, surprisingly human, sometimes sad and poignant in their expressions. They sat down together on a pile of bricks by the smelter tower. A man with a top hat and a tiny monkey on a chain walked by. Milo followed them. He reached for the monkey's tail, and the monkey turned, bared its teeth, and hissed. Milo fell back. Joe unloaded his easel and paints from Magic's pack. He took off Magic's saddle. Magic shook himself and ran off into the darkness away from the crowds. He was starting to look spooked, Joe said. "I saw it too," Marina said and came toward him. "No," he said, "stay on the bricks. Let me paint you. I really want to," he said. "I know you probably don't like that kind of thing, but I gotta remember you somehow." Okay. When had she last seen an image of herself? In the window of a store in Trona? There was no telling the time that had passed since then. There was no since and no then. There was only tonight and all the people from all the times surrounding her. It was dizzying and thrilling. Even the oddly formal man before her thrilled her. At first, she counted the rolls of thunder that passed while Joe painted. She counted the stars, and then she counted their absence. She lost count of all of it. She lost track of Joe, forgot she was being painted as she watched the crowds. Where had the cotton candy come from? And where the glitter on the face of the clown on stilts? A teenager wore earbuds. She thought she heard "There's going to be a hot time in the old town tonight" playing in the distance. Fire, fire, fire. The stars had all disappeared when she saw the first flash of lightning in the distance. She couldn't count the moments between the thunder and the lightning. She stared at Joe's downturned face covered with a scowl of concentration until he looked up at her and saw her staring. Lightning flashed behind him, first the type that lights up the whole sky, and then, later, a jagged scar that tore the night in two. Milo returned and sat beside her. "I'm tired," he said. His energy seemed drained and his expression worried. There was an enormous crash of thunder, and then lightning so big it branched off in 1,000 directions like the streaks of quartz in a granite rock face, a prehistoric event, a lightning that took up the entire sky, that made paths into dreams and into underground tunnels and carved out trails across the sky as if the sky were a busy marketplace the size of the multiverse. A wicked arm of lightning struck the Ferris wheel, and then, as if she were watching a cartoon from childhood, she could see the glowing skeletons of all the people on the Ferris wheel, the skeleton hands of the children grasping the rails and their skeleton jaws open in screams. It was as if they'd all turned to lightning. "Everyone's here," Milo whispered, though clearly he had not anticipated this. She looked wildly at Joe. He stood statue-like, the paintbrush stopped in mid-air, his mouth open. All the people were screaming and running. Little flames broke out on the Ferris wheel. Children were jumping from the highest seats and dropping through the night air. Joe rushed to Milo and Marina. Marina bent her head so she did not have to look anymore. A thin rain fell around them, and when she finally raised her head, everything seemed to be melting in that rain. The rain drowned out the screaming and the Ferris wheel and was now only a trace of light moving in a slow circle. The lanterns were barely visible, then not visible at all. The stalls, the clowns, the smell of grilled meat all seemed to wash away. Only the blue spotlights around the smelter tower were still lit. Joe tucked the painting under his arm, and they ran through the rain toward the Panamint Hilton. That's a ruined cabin. They stood on the porch, the rain now slanting into their faces. The mobiles, made of random rusted pieces of metal, unidentifiable springs and coils and triangles from vehicles and mining garbage, clanged like a postmodern orchestra of noise. "Someone's calling me," Milo said, and ran off into the night. She opened the door. Inside, the cabin seemed newly built. A little miner's cabin from the 1970s with a wood stove glowing around the edges. The only thing remaining of the night was the blue-lit smelter tower rising above them like a god. Rain smashed against the window. Joe sat down in a rocking office chair with a wooden frame. The bed was covered with a dark blue and green plaid blanket. "You take the bed," he said, leaning back and kicking his feet up on the edge of the blanket. Lightning filled the back window, which had otherwise always been boarded. A lit lantern sat on the table beside the bed. The mattress felt new, firm by anyone's standards, except Marina's. Still, she sank into it as if it were one more luxury the carnival painter had brought her body still holding muscle memory of 20 years of her life she'd spent sleeping on such a thing. The cabin walls shook in the immense wind. There was so much rain she was worried they'd be washed down the canyon. When she woke, still to darkness, he was sleeping beside her, but on top of the blanket facing her. "Why haven't you disappeared?" she asked. "I will," he said, without opening his eyes. Okay, so that's the first time I've ever read anything from that. These are poems, and they're new, and they're from a collection called "Why the Stars Drink Wine in Tennessee." Betting on Comets. And I'm reading these in part because I worked with a poetry group today, so I figured I should end with some poems. Betting on Comets. On the darkest night of the year, we play cards on the boat deck, nested in camping mats, wrapped in blankets. You throw the queen of bumblebees, I the prince of conchs. The numbers are uncountable, the faces only familiar in shards. The sky plays music we can't recognize. The star chart is ablaze, haywire, upside down. We can't know what any of it means. It is, after all, the darkest night. We cannot even embrace. Still, there is this certainty in you asleep beside me, the snores that signal the force of your living. And a celebration brews inside me, splays itself against the star-crowded night. We are even this close, this close. What fortune, what throw of the unfamiliar cards. The Stars in Tennessee. The stars have thrown the last blue dice. They've rolled the milky-eyed marble. The only thing left to do is pour the sea grape wine and toast the now. Wink and blink all they can, nothing changes the enormity of the multiverse, that ginger root in the sky packed tight with cosmos and vast black. In Tennessee, in the humid green and the song of tree frogs, scars of lightning tear the night. Our lives are tiny and lost. The wine contains all things we cannot hold. At least, we say, nodding to one another in the firelight's shadows. The stars are with us tonight, in celebration, in mourning, in all things mysterious and bright. Crisis. I've come to the desert to grieve my mother's death, but I do not know how. So many have died already, and grief came easy. But here in all this space, among white cathedral canyons of the long dead, I am paralyzed and confused. The stars are too far away, in a too dark night, and no starman provides me a map. The canyons and badlands are caked with the chalky mud of flash floods, and boulders vibrate with the rush of dead rivers, and the lake beds and ocean bottoms waver with the dreams of ancient sea life. The business of my life stacks itself against the back side of an invisible door, insistent I return. I am alone and desperate, trying to rewrite the life ahead of me like a rabbit redigging its home in the shifting dunes. Homecoming. Home after time in the desert. I wake to the moon's shadows of branches crossing the frozen yard. I wake again to the moon setting, a glowing stone, Buddha-like on the horizon. In the morning, I step onto an icy crust, slick and white. Coyotes call all about me. There is desert in everything. Lunar eclipse. The dock's hardware creaks. Everything rusted and stuck breaks loose like horses in a dream. Shadows crossing a snowy field and disappearing. Except for the clatter of hooves, turned into the cries of night birds, and the dash of darkness you will always see fleeting when you close your eyes. One more star. Each time I wake, there is one more star in the sky. In the morning, news of your death. Gift. I leave you with the gift of my dying, the door wide open. The candle on the table is for you also. Shadow light for the visitors, wavers in the draft. In this thin space, you can see what you had not seen before. And the inheritor of dreams. The inheritor of dreams enters my kitchen with her carpet bag of seahorses and coral. Salt water rises to our knees. Coyotes of fog peer in the windows. The dog won't stop barking. Even the sofa doesn't know where to float. I am impenetrable and lost. I gaze into the mirrored eyes of a seahorse, a tiny me upside down, surrounded by the aura of a full moon, an infinite hazy brightness. The inheritor of dreams leaves me her bag. And then I'm going to end with this one. We must come to the table. The thief rearranges the deck chairs under the sequined moon. The stars in their jackets of light glow like uncertain angels. Come to the table, my dead mother says. Everything unwinds. The string around the propeller, the cassette tape with your voice, my mind in the lonely morning. I untangle the anchor, sink the buoy, and rise from bed. I come to the table, but no one is here. I count off the dead and shuffle the deck of cards. Everything that has been lost will be found in plain sight in the brightness of our arrival. Thanks. Do you guys have any questions? Well, it's hard to say because I'll have a lot of free writing, and I'll have, you know, weeks of free writing, and then suddenly there'll be a poem, but it'll have come out of lines that have come before. So it builds, and then there'll be a bunch of them at once, and then there won't be anything for a long time but pages of you know, random junk. Yeah. Yeah, well, the novel was really new to me because I did a lot of research, and I've never done research before. And so that was the first thing that was really different about it. I just researched a ton. It was really fascinating. And then trying to make that research seem natural and not sound just like research was really hard. I think the process for the novel writing isn't all that different. I mean, it's not as different for me than writing short stories, as opposed to the difference between writing short stories and writing poetry, right? Because a chapter operates a lot like a short story. Only you don't have to start over again, you know? And also, you don't have anything. You don't have anything to show for it for a long time, which is a little hard. I'm used to having something to show for it, right? Look, I've done a story, or I have a poem. And with a novel, you don't have that. You just have all these words, and it takes a really long time. And so that's a little harder for me to psychologically get over. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah. Yeah, no, they aren't. Well, the stars are a really new, I guess, motif for me, and I didn't even realize that they were all over the novel, as well. But when I kind of was putting this together, I was like, oh, look, the stars are here and they're here. The Starman is a character in the novel. The main character is kind of autistic, and the Starman is kind of autistic too. He's a guy who calls himself Starman. And he is actually a real person who she had a brief, you know, thing with as much as she could. And so, you know, but also I spent a lot of time in Death Valley, and I spent a lot of time in the town of Tacopa, and there are people who do a lot of star shows there. And so I kind of got into that, and so I think that part of it comes from that. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah. And then how about Tennessee? Nothing. I had a dream that my sister was singing in a folk band. She doesn't sing at all. But the chorus of the song was, "Why do the stars drink wine in Tennessee?" I have no idea where it came from, but I really liked it, and so I've held on to it. Yeah. I lived in Florida for a long time, but not really Tennessee. Anything else? Okay, thank you, y'all.